Hello everyone and welcome to my item tier list for Wild Rift patch 6.1 in the brand new season 17. I did the runes yesterday, so if you want to go and check out that video, I did a rune tier list. I'll link that down in the description. In today's video, we're going to be talking about items. Again, as I mentioned yesterday, a little bit of a disclaimer. Every item is situational. This tier list is more to do with me talking about an overview of the items, especially the new items as well, Battle Fantasy and Malignance, giving you all my thoughts, but also giving you a bit of value towards what items should be just basically avoided every game and what games you should be considering every single item. So let's run into this and let's head straight into this as well. Physical, I mean, no surprise that items like Divine Sunderer and Trinity Force are sitting at the top. Both of these items are just very powerful on a lot of different champions. Tanks can build Divine Sunderer, bruisers can build Divine Sunderer. Trinity Force is just built on pretty much every single jungler in the game and every single top laner as well. Trinity Force is probably a little bit better than Divine Sunderer since Trinity Force gives you a bit more carry potential, but Divine Sunderer is very good against tanks and bruisers if you're against a bunch of them. Both of these items are still the best items in the game. To be fair, even some AD carries build Trinity Force as well, just because of how strong and how much you get from this item alone. In the A tier, I'll skip the support items like the Ancient Coin and Relic Shield until the end. More of Mortius, again, just a very strong item, especially when you're against a lot of magic damage and against a lot of ability power. Again, bruisers build this a lot, junglers build this a lot, as well as AD carries. This is normally your AP defensive item, but it also gives you damage at the same time. It has the old Bloodthirster passive where you now gain a magic shield. So you're basically not going to be one shot by any AP assassins or any mages, which is absolutely great. Serpent's Fang is very, very powerful. There is a lot of shielding in this game right now, and you'll notice that in the magic section as well. The Ocean's Trident is also very high. It's just because in general there's a lot of shielding, and most of the time you will be building this item if you're playing either like AD carry or AD junglers or even AD top laners. You just want to build Serpent's Fang, get the anti-shield, and champions like Milio and Lux and Lulu will just be able to shield less. But also this works with like Set W, Goggle Stoneplate as well gets reduced, so there's a lot of value that you get from Serpent's Fang alone, and also just deals a lot of damage. There is a situation where sometimes you will go Yomu's Ghostblade. I'll just skip the Ghostblade because it's basically the same. There are some games where you build, well, most games actually, you build both of these items if you're playing assassins, AD assassins, like Kha'Zix, potentially even Zed as well, just because there's not a lot of other options for AD assassins. So you go both Yomu's and Serpent's Fang. So you get the movement speed and the damage with Yomu's Ghostblade, but you still get the anti-shield at the same time. But sometimes you have to decide whether you want Serpent's Fang or Yomu's Ghostblade. Sometimes you go for Serpent's Fang, sometimes you go for Yomu's Ghostblade. Again, depends on the shielding on the enemy team. Bloodthirster is still one of the best crit items in the game right now. Very, very powerful on a lot of AD carries. It's just the best item really overall for any champion that wants to deal crit. If you're playing like Crit Viego, for example, you still build Bloodthirster. If you play like Kindred as well, Akshan, Bloodthirster just gives you way too much value in terms of stats. You get a lot of damage, you get a lot of sustain, and also you have the extra attack speed as well on top of that. So a lot of great damage, a lot of great sustain, and it just in general a very strong item. And the same with Magnetic Blaster. Again, a very good item for crit champions. Probably the strongest attack speed item right now in the game. Much stronger than items like Slurry Chargeblade or even Phantom Dancer in terms of crit attack speed items. Slurry Chargeblade is a bit more situational, but Magnetic Blaster, you get in the extra attack range every few seconds. Just helps you so much in team fights. Also gives you a bit of magic damage as well. So even if enemies are building armor, the magic damage from Blaster won't change. So you'll be able to deal a bit of extra damage from that one. The question of Mortal Minder over Serrader's Grudge. I think the big difference here is that Mortal Minder and Serrader's Grudge, of course, they give you the same in terms of the % armor pen. The big difference is, though, is that Mortal Minder is 200 more gold and 10 less attack damage. And the reason why Mortal Minder is more gold and less attack damage is because you get the anti-heal. But the big thing is that with anti-heal you can just buy Executioner's Calling, which just costs 800 gold, and then build into Serrader's Grudge or build into another damage item which is going to give you a lot more value. you do not need to complete Mortal Reminder for it to be powerful. The difference is only 10% as well. Executioner's Calling gives you 40% Grievous Wounds. Mortal Reminder gives you 50% Grievous Wounds. So that you're spending so much extra gold for Mortal Reminder instead of buying Serrade's Grudge, which is only giving you 10% more Grievous Wounds, which honestly is not going to make a lot of difference. Serrade's Grudge is very, very strong because it gives you more AD. It also gives you ability haste and also gives you that icy passive. Now, of course, not all champions are going to build Serrade's Grudge. There are only certain champions that can build it because some champions just don't really benefit from the icy passive. But in general, both of these items are very strong. Armor penetration and percent armor penetrations are vital in your builds. They're both in A tier because they're both situational and you build one or the other. And to be honest, even some top laners, even some bruisers right now, Camille, Aatrox, there are so many bruisers that you can build in the top lane so many champions in the top lane that still build armor penetration in their build. They still fit it in their build because they need the extra damage because there's so much base armor in this game in general. But yeah, both armor pen items are very, very strong. Enchant, this is normally your AD defensive item. I think the Annul passive as well as the Crown of Shattered Queen version, the AP version is very, very powerful. There's a lot of crowd control in the game, so that extra crowd control passive and the shield that you get is very, very strong. Very, very good if you want to go for, some assassins and you want to jump in and deal a lot of damage. The Enchant is going to protect you from crowd control coming your way. So again, a very powerful item that you should be considering. B tier items are like average items. I wouldn't really call these B tier items strong or weak. I'll just quickly go through them because there's not really too much to talk about with B tier items. It's more when we go down to like the C and D tier items that I can talk about a little bit more. Infinity Edge, just in general, a decent crit item. Increasing your overall crit damage is very, very nice. However, this item can be very expensive. That's why it's in the B tier, and sometimes it's replaced by other items instead because they're much cheaper, and over time it can deal more damage. As I mentioned already, Solari Charge Blade, a bit more of a situational item, is used on champions that want to spam abilities a lot. Viego, Crit, and also Zeri are two good examples where you spam abilities, you can stack Solari Charge Blade and deal a bunch of auto attack damage. Corki is also another great example. Titanic Hydra, even though this is a health item, it still gives you damage and it still overall is in my opinion, an AD item. Overall, this item is pretty solid. It's pretty nice. Again, it scales with your bonus health. So I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the defense section, but there are a lot of health items which are very powerful right now, which Titanic Hydra can synergize with just to give you some more damage. Dustblade is pretty nice if you're able to use this to your advantage. Again, the big thing with Dustblade now is that you don't need to be invisible to proc the passive. You can just walk up, use an ability or auto attack, and you're going to slow enemy champions. Really good against champions that have a lot of movement speed and want movement speed to be able to kite during team fights. And also allows you to stick onto champions much easier as well. Immortal Shield Bow, more of a situational AD crit item. This is used really against most assassin champions that you really want to protect yourself against. However, you're not going to be dealing as much damage if you build, I don't know, Infinity Edge as well or something like that. But the passive is very strong. The shield passive that you get can be very powerful, can protect you against a lot of burst damage champions. Runa's Hurricane is a situational really item as like your final crit item, or sorry, not final crit item, your final item just in general for AD carries once you have 100% crit. This also works pretty decent on hit champions that want to build a lot of attack speed. The spread of bolts damage works with your range, so the more range you have, the further the bolts will go as well. So overall, this item is pretty decent. I think that if this item did have crit, it would be very, very powerful. But in general, the item is decent and it can work well on some crit AD carries as the last item. Stormrazor, I just think the damage is way too low on this item. I like the synergy of Stormrazor plus Magnetic Blaster, but to be honest, you can just go Bloodthirster into Blaster, and these two items just have much better synergy. You get more damage, you get more sustain, and just overall just two better items. Stormrazor, in my opinion, is weaker than Bloodthirster. The damage is nice. The extra stacks that you get with Stormrazor as well is quite nice. But yeah, in general, like, you know, the energized stacks is quite nice, but in general, the item is a little bit weaker. Clips is nice on champions that can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time. Riven and Aatrox are good examples. But overall, the shield is not as strong as what it could be, and there's not a lot of AD compared to other items. So, I mean, if this was a broken item, it would be built on like every single top laner, to be fair, and every single bruiser, but it's only situational on some champions that can really benefit from this. Witsend is really, really strong on hit champions. Kai'Sa, Varus on hit if you want to go for that. Vayne as well is another great example. Really good against if you're against a lot of magic damage as well. The damage is not as high as what it was before. They did nerf it a few patches ago. I believe they nerfed the on-hit damage of Witsend, but overall the item is still pretty strong against champions that build ability power. Blade Warring King, really strong against tanks since you do percent health damage. But in general, the damage is much lower than other items. The attack speed is very high, but you only get 25 attack damage. So you really kind of use this for the utility. And if you're playing against tanks, if you're not playing against tanks, then just skip this item completely. Sundered Sky has really good synergy with champions that have either auto attack resets or empowered auto attacks, I should say. Nasus, for example, is a great example where you can use this with your first ability to guarantee that crit to do a lot of damage. Aatrox with his passive, with his auto attacks, is also another choice. But again, it's very situational to them sort of champions. And outside of that, the item is decent. But again, it's only for champions that can auto attack and maybe have empowered auto attacks to help with your damage. Manamune is actually pretty decent now. You can actually use this on quite a lot of junglers. Kayn and Hecarim are probably the two that come to mind, maybe even Kha'Zix as well. The buff that happened to Manamune now that you can stack this item much quicker is very nice. You have champions like Corki and Ezreal that can also, of course, use this item. You've been able to stack the item much quicker. It means you get to mirror mana much quicker, which allows you to get your spike much sooner in the game. The problem before is that even if you built this item first, it would take way too long to stack, but now it's pretty decent. Sometimes you can even build this as a second item now. As I mentioned, you know, junglers like Hecarim can go Trinity Force into Manamune, and you still stack it in pretty decent time. Black Cleaver overall is a pretty decent item. Overall, you get some nice stats, HP, attack damage is really nice. The extra movement speed is, of course, great for champions like Hecarim, and also you being able to reduce armor is also great. Most of the time, you kind of use this on like AoE AD champions, to be honest, like Hecarim, for example. As a single target item, you'd much rather go for something like Sundered Sky instead. But if you have AoE champions that do AoE attack damage, then Black Cleaver is great because it will reduce the armor of all champions around you. So like Hecarim, for example, with his first ability is very, very powerful. Terminus is still good if you want to go for on hit. It's still great as a first item. It still could be used as on hit in the jungle as well. Most of the time, you only really build this on like Kai'Sa, to be honest. This item has been nerfed way too many times, in my opinion. I still think the item is strong because it gives you both armor pen and magic pen, which of course, if your champion does AD and AP damage, it synergizes very well, as well as the extra resistances that you get, which is why it works so well for on-hit champions. The more you attack, the more resistances and the more damage you'll be able to deal. Their stance against attack damage is very nice. You can get the reset mechanic. Of course, you're going to be taking like true damage over time, which is really going to hurt you. But if you can get the reset, if you can get the kills, then it's great. Champions like Camille, for example, which can lock a champion in place. You take reduced damage from AD champions, and then if you kill that champion in your ultimate as well, especially because they can't escape, which makes it easier, then you'll be able to get the reset and heal all that true damage that you've just been taken. So overall, it's pretty nice. C tier, these are, in my opinion, items that are pretty weak and don't really get picked that much at the moment. Collector, I would say, is only really used on certain champions that either have a reset mechanic that wants to get the execute, like Viego and Samira, for example. Outside of that, the item doesn't really do too much. You can build on a champion like Jhin because it's a cheap item and the crit converts into attack damage with Jhin, so it's quite nice. But even champions like Neela that could build this item, I think Bloodthirster is much better. And yeah, in general, Collector is just not really that strong. Nash's Tooth is probably the weakest on-hit item at the moment. I think all the other on-hit items just gives you way too much value. Ruinous Hurricane for the spread damage, Witsend against AP champions, and Terminus for, of course, the armor pen and extra defenses, whereas Nash's Tooth doesn't really give you that much value at all. SS Reaver only gets used really for a few champions like Varus, and that's it, really, to be honest. Even Corki builds Manamune now because it scales much quicker and it gives you much more damage when it gets to the mid and late game. SS Reaver overall is definitely falling out of the meta because of how strong Manamune is right now. And Spirit Shogun just deals 0 damage. It's pretty nice when you use your ultimate, so you can use it for like Camille and Fiora, for example. It can work pretty well, but the damage that Spirit Shogun gives is just way too low compared to other AD Bruiser items, you know, like Sundered Sky that gives you the crit on auto attack, Eclipse as well, and these other AD Bruiser items, as well as like Trinity Force as well, for example. So I personally just don't really like Spirit Shogun as an item. And the Vori Quick Blades, again, more of a situational crit item. Only really gets used for like Xayah and Neela, champions that want to use their abilities a lot more often. Of course, Xayah with her feathers, Neela with her dashes, and her reset with her first ability. Outside of that, crit champions just never really build this item. The damage is too low, and if you don't get much value from your abilities, then this item is pretty useless. And a D tier Chempunk Chainsword, no one ever builds this item. Every single champion in the game would much rather build Mortal Reminder as a magic pen item, even though it is like 500 gold more expensive. Chempunk Chainsword, unfortunately, is not that good. Doesn't really give you much value. Again, the armor penetration, the percent armor penetration is much more valuable for Mortal Reminder than going Chempunk Chainsword. And Phantom Dancer, again, no one ever builds this item. There are much better attack speed items right now. I think in general, these two items need to be either reworked or just deleted from the game and replaced with other items, because these two items just not working in the game right now. On to magic. Not that many magic items. As I was mentioning though, Ocean's Trident is at the top of the magic tree. This item is so cheap, 2,600 gold for 80 ability power. Even if enemy champions don't have that much shielding, this item is that strong that you can just build this item anyway. 200 health, 80 ability power, 10 ability haste. This item has so much value towards it. And of course, if you're against champions that have shielding, it makes this item even better. This item is cheap. This item gives you a shit ton of stats and is just crazy strong right now. Must build on pretty much every single AP champion in the game right now. AP supports, AP assassins, AP mages, any champions are going to be building that. And the same with Rabadons as well. I mean, no surprise, Rabadons is still sitting up here. It just gives you the most amount of ability power and the most amount of scaling ability power over time. Again, assassins, mages, enchanters, AP supports, you know, any one of these champions can really benefit from Death Cap. Into the A tier, Crown of the Shattered Queen. Again, kind of similar to Edge and Knight of what I was mentioning before. That passive that allows you to block damage or block any crowd control that comes your way is very powerful and can be considered really strong, especially with so much crowd control in the game right now. This item can be considered very good, and overall it gives you mana and some decent stats. Awakened Soul Stealer is still very strong. The Awakened Soul Stealer plus Infinity Orb combo, not only does it give you the percent magic pen, but it also gives you the flat magical penetration as well, which if you build this as a first item, that flat magic penetration in the early game actually gives you more magic penetration than the percent magic penetration, because obviously in the early game, champions might only have like 20 or 30 magic resist. So you're reducing that by 15, whereas percent magic penetration only does better when you're scaling into the mid and the late game, since champions will have more magic resist. So the percent magic penetration with 7%, you're going to be taken away a lot more when they have more magic resist. So that's why Awakened Soul Stealer and also Infinity Orb is very strong. But not only that, Infinity Orb also allows you to crit when champions are below 35% health, which is very powerful. And also you have the reset mechanic with Awakened Soul Stealer. When you're able to get a takedown with enemy champions, you'll be able to do that. Now, Awakened Soul Stealer's passive description can be very complicated. It says every time you take down an enemy champion within 3 seconds of dealing damage. So that basically means you can stay in a fight for 10 seconds and you can keep damaging enemy champions for 10 seconds. If you then get a takedown within that 10 seconds, it's completely fine. It's when you move away from enemy champions, say you walk away and you don't do damage for 3 seconds, that's when the passive gets taken off. But if you stay in a fight for 20 seconds and you keep dealing damage, Awakened Soul Stealer passive will proc. It's not that you need to burst the champion in 3 seconds. You just need to make sure you're damaging them within like 3 seconds of them being able to get taken down. So that's why Awakened Soul Stealer is pretty powerful. Harmonic Echo, by far the best support item in the game. The amount of extra healing and shielding that you get with Harmonic Echo, with the healing shield percentage, the passive as well. Like the passive is just way too powerful. And this comboed with Ingenious Hunter as well means you can stack this item quicker, so you can proc it more often. Very, very powerful item right now. Luna's Echo, even though we do have Bandle Fantasy, which some of you might be surprised is sitting down in the C tier, Luna's Echo is still much stronger. I honestly thought Bandle Fantasy could be a very strong item, But in general, Luna's Echo is much better just because you have the extra wave clear. It's much more reliable to hit the Luna's Echo passive as well on enemy champions because it cannot be dodged. And also it gives you more wave clear, which gives you more potential to roam around the map and do a bunch of other things. Unfortunately, the boots and mana buff where you get like 7 extra physical damage or something doesn't actually make a lot of difference at all. Luna's Echo is still getting picked pretty much most games on AP mages and AP damage dealers as supports because of the wave clear and because of the reliability of this item. Moving down to B tier, Lichbane is really good if you build this later on into the game, since the scaling can increase the damage of Lichbane. It can work on some champions as a first item or second item, but in general it's pretty weak in the early game. But the reason why it's in B tier is because it's one of the best scaling items in the late game. If your champion can auto attack and do a bunch of damage, you can build this as like a last or second last item and deal a bunch of damage. Morellonomicon in general is weaker than like Mortal Reminder in terms of stats and everything as well. More like Morellonomicon doesn't really give you that much in terms of extra damage. Again, the big reason why you'd build Morellonomicon is because of Grievous Wounds, but to be honest, with AP Assassins and AP Mages, most of the time your goal is to one-shot anyway. So you're not really building Morellonomicon for the anti-heal because you should be one-shotting them before they can heal up anyway. And your one-shot should go above the healing from, you know, other champions as well. The only thing that can really counter that is, of course, shielding, which is why Ocean's Trident is much stronger. But in general, Morellonomicon can still work pretty well. Riftmaker, again, as like a last item for mages, is very powerful. It can work on some champions, the first item. But again, most of the time it's pretty weak because with mages, most of the time you're bursting champions and then you're coming out of a team fight. Whereas late game fights is really where Riftmaker can come online when you're in fights longer, you're dealing damage for longer. Whereas the early game, you don't really want to build as a first item because you don't get that much value unless you're playing champions like Vladimir and Gwen, who can stay in fights for a lot longer. On-Sense and Starfall Flow and Water, both these support items are still very good. Of course, the healing and shield percentage stack on top of each other with Harmonic Echo. So On-Sensor plus Starfall Flow and Water plus Harmonic Echo is a very strong combo right now. On-Sensor gives you and your allies more attack speed. Starfall Flow and Water gives them AP and ability haste. So both of these work very well. Liandry's Torment, again, more of like a later game item. Again, the scaling of Liandry's and Lichbane are very, very powerful when you get into the mid and the late game. Liandry's can be built on some champions as a first item, especially if they deal damage over time. Champions like Brand, for example, is a good example. Singed as well. These champions deal damage over time with their abilities, so that will stack on top with Liandry's passive. So that's why most of you champions build them as a first item, because even though the damage is not that great on burst mages, because you only got like 1 or 2 abilities that you're proccing, the damage over time, every single tick of the damage over time is going to proc Liandry. So that's why it's very good on them. Rod of Age is a much better item now since the recent buff. It now actually can be used on some mages and can give you the damage and the sustain that you really need and the extra HP that you need, which is really nice. Malignance is very situational. I think the item is validated at a B tier. I don't think this item is extremely OP that you can build this on every single champion. I would say more situational. I'll probably do a video later on down the line with like the best champions to build Malignance on. But for me, the champions are Swain, Annie, and Ari. These champions use the item the best out of anyone. And when you do use them correctly, use it correctly, it can definitely help you do a lot more damage. But again, it's all about lockdown with Malignance. It's all about making sure that the champions stay in the pool, because there's no point using your ultimate and then champions can just walk away from the pool. What's the point of that? Like, you're not going to be able to do anything. And Rylai's is now a much better item. This item now getting % magic penetration is an absolute game changer. Champions like Singed and Aurelian Soul benefit from this item so much now. I mean, you still get a decent amount of ability power and health, but a % magic penetration is a game changer for this item. You can now build this and actually feel like you do damage rather than building this item and missing out on 7% magic penetration, which in the late game is going to be a big bummer. C tier Archangel Staff basically only gets built on Orianna, and that's it. This item is not very good. Rise is another one as well. Sorry, basically champions that uses abilities a lot, Rise and Orianna, but in general this item is not that strong because, again, you don't really need mana in Wild Rift because you have Boots and mana. You have Ludens, which also gives you a lot of mana as well. So Archangel Staff giving you extra mana is not really needed. It's nice for the shield, which is like why champions like Orianna and Rise build Archangel is more because of the shield rather than the mana. Psychic Protector, more situational if you're building a more, I guess, bruiser build with mages, if you're building a lot more HP. But in general, this item doesn't really give you that much value, so that's why it's in C tier. Horizon Focus as well. Again, there's much better items that give you more damage than Horizon Focus. You can only really use this on champions that have a lot of range, like Ziggs, but even then, you'd much rather build other items. Cosmic Drive as well. Again, attack speed at the movement speed is not really that impactful. Again, you don't really get that much damage either in terms of the passive, so you much rather build other items instead. Imperial Mandate, probably the weakest support item right now. Sometimes you could build it on like Nami, but even then, Nami would rather build like Harmonic Echo on Center and Starflow Flow Water now, whereas Imperial Mandate is just very weak. You just don't get any value from the item at all. Crystalline Reflector as well, again, pretty weak item. They have been buffing it a few times to try and make it a viable item. I would say it's viable on some AP champions that play top lane, that are against a lot of AD damage, like Mordekaiser, for example, but outside of that, the item is just very weak. It was kind of trying to use it as a more defensive item, like if you're against a lot of AD damage, then mages can build Crystalline Reflector, but you would much rather just build more damage in the end. And as I said, Bandle Fantasy, you might be surprised to see in C tier, but unfortunately this item is not as strong as what I thought it would be. Again, the passive itself can do more damage than Ludens, but in general, it's just much harder to hit the Ludens. Ludens are a lot more reliable. Ludens helps you more with wave clear. The only champions I would really build Bandle Fantasy on is champions that don't really need wave clear, like Lux and Karma, but you're playing support Lux and Karma, where you're more focused on landing abilities and dealing damage rather than using them for wave clear. So that's the only champions that I would really build Bandle Fantasy on. And of course, I don't say much about Medjai's, but Medjai's in D tier. No one should ever build this item. It's absolute fucking trash. All right, on to the defensive items. As I mentioned before with Titanic Hydra, there's a lot of defense items that build a lot of HP right now, and a lot of strong items that build HP, like Hot Steel, for example. Hot Steel is still very powerful on tank support, on tanks in the top lanes, basically any tanks in general. Hot Steel is very powerful. The only time you wouldn't build Hot Steel is in the jungle, because obviously you can't proc it as much as in like the top lane and the support role. But in general, this item is very powerful and gives you a crazy amount of HP, which is probably the most valuable stat in the game. Ziggs Convergence, even though this got nerfed a few patches ago, the crazy thing is Ziggs is now being built on bruisers. Olaf, Vi, these sort of bruisers that want to stick to enemy champions, or their ultimate gives them access to backline carries. It's just free damage, it's free defense stats, and also it slows nearby champions as well, which means you can stick onto them and deal more damage with your auto attack. Not only that, but of course, tank supports use Ziggs as well, just because it gives them more damage, and their ultimate most of the time is to do with crowd control. So in general, Ziggs is very, very strong right now. Just free damage, free slows, and you can build them on bruisers as well, which is, I guess, a new thing this patch. And Yordle Trap. Now, at first, I was kind of a bit 50-50 about Yordle Trap. I was like, yes, this item's stats are not really too great. This item is kind of meh. But to be honest, Wild Rift, is a game that just snowballs way too out of hand, and a game that you are always going to get kills no matter what. If you end a game 0-0-0, if you end a game on, I would say, below 5 kills or assists, you are doing something wrong. Wild Rift is a game where there are so many team fights, there are so many fights that happens that you should be getting a lot of takedowns throughout the game. And that's why Yordle Trap is strong. Of course, Yordle Trap is normally only used on tank supports as well that have any sort of displacement, like Rakan, like Thresh. These sort of tank supports are going to be at the front line in your team, and you're going to be the first persons to engage. So if you engage on enemy champions, if you displace them, if you take them down, then Yordle Trap is going to give you so much extra free gold to yourself and also to your team. So the extra gold is going to help you out a lot. And the extra gold you get as well, like, it's just a disgusting amount. I don't know what Riot were thinking, but yeah, Yordle Trap's pretty powerful. Thornmail, really good. Of course, is the Grievous Wounds item. I think Thornmail is probably the strongest out of any of the Grievous Wounds items, unless you're playing obviously a bruiser and maybe champions that you can gain access to the backline. But even some bruisers nowadays would rather build Thornmail or just build the tier 2 item instead, which I can't remember the item. Warden's Mail, is it? No, I think that's another item. I can't remember what the tier 2 item is, but basically item that builds into Thornmail that gives you Grievous Wounds. Most bruisers build that nowadays because it's much harder to get to AD carries on the back line, and if you are the front line, then the AD carries are always going to be auto-attacking you. So you gain the same amount of Grievous Wounds that you would with Thornmail as you do with Mortal Reminder. So if you don't trust yourself, or if it's very hard for you to get onto the back line to deal damage, then just go Thornmail. Just be a front line, try and play front to back, and let the AD carry attack you, so then they apply Grievous Wounds. Amaranth's Twin Guard is very strong, especially for champions that don't build a lot of armor and MR. People build Twin Guard when they're playing light tanks and they already have a lot of armor and MR. But this item is very strong on champions that actually don't have a lot of magic resistant armor, because you'll be able to increase your armor and magic resist by a lot with this item alone, and also the percentage, which, yes, is still very good on tanks, but if you think about it, if you play this as an AD carry, as a last item with Twin Guard, the amount of defensive stats you get for this item just for playing a carry alone, like, as I mentioned, like an AD carry, the amount of extra defensive stats you get is absolutely crazy. I mean, there are so many different champions that this works well on as well. You can even use this on like bruiser AP champions like Swain, for example. You can play full damage Aatrox, full lethality Aatrox, or full lethality Wukong, and you can still build Twin Guard to get that survivability as a bruiser as well. Just overall, this item gives you way too many stats. Sterix Gauge is also very powerful just because of the lifeline passive. You know, if you was to go below 35% health, then you gain a shield which decays, which is absolutely great. But also trigger and lifeline also gives you tenacity as well. So if you do trigger Sterix Gauge, you can keep going forward because you have the shield, and also you get the attack damage on top of that as well, which I'm not too sure if it's on here. I think this needs to update because it says can only be purchased on melee champions, which is wrong. So I might need to update this. But in general, this item is very strong on both melee and also can be used on some ranged champions as well. But most of the time it's melee champions. But you also get AD on top of it as well, which is very strong. Kainic Rukun, surprisingly one of the strongest magic resist items right now. And the reason why is kind of similar to what I was saying with Titanic Hydra. There are so many tanks right now and there are so many strong items which have health already, as well as you building defensive boots, which also has health, which means you're going to be getting more of a shield from Kainic Rukun. The more health you get, the bigger the shield you're going to get. And it actually scales with 10% of your maximum health, which is quite a lot. And that magic shield is kind of similar to like more of Malmortius, so it's going to help you against a lot of burst damage. Of course, at the moment, mages are very powerful in the current meta, so Kainic Rukun is being built a lot. And Frozen Heart, again, this item is very strong, especially for tanks that build AP damage. Tanks like Maokai, as well as Ornn as well. Tanks that deal AP damage, you being able to reduce the attack speed of enemy champions and you being able to chill them. You can also chill them with auto attacks as well at the same time. Just overall, very powerful item. Very, very powerful for champions and tanks that, deal AP damage. Again, B tier, pretty average items. Guardian Angel is good as the last item if you need the Resurrect passive, but in general, the stats are pretty low and you don't really get a lot of damage overall. It's just really used for a Resurrect passive. Mantle 12 Hours, pretty decent on some champions, but overall, tanks would rather go for other items that just give them a lot more tanky stats and a lot more survivability. Searing Crown is really good for AoE tanks like a Mumu and Nunu, for example, that deal a lot of damage over time, that want to be a little bit more tankier. On them champions itself, they're very powerful. Outside of that, it's not really that powerful. I mean, Ornn is another champion that can also use this item pretty well. Redemption is really supposed to be in the support tier. Maybe I'll just talk about that a little bit more. Actually, no, I'll talk about it now because I talked about the other support items. But Redemption overall with the healing and shielding percentage, actually I'll talk about both these items at the same time. So Protector's Vow and Redemption both give the healing and shielding percentage, which is two pretty decent support items. Protector's Vow is very good if you're playing on the backline with your AD carry and you're sticking close to your AD carry all the time, and maybe you need some more defensive stats yourself. That's really nice, and the Protector's passive is going to help you and the AD carry. And Redemption, again, also works with Ingenious Hunter, so you'll be able to heal more often, and again, the healing and shielding will be increased thanks to the stat, and the healing from Redemption will also be increased. Dawn Shroud, pretty meh at the moment. I mean, it's pretty decent on some supports that have guaranteed crowd control, extra damage, extra bit of healing, but overall it's kind of meh. Sunfire is really good for champions that can stick to enemies very easily. Ornn and Amumu again are just two tanks that I think of straight away. Even Alistar, it can work. It's not, you know, not Alistar. Malphite, it can work pretty well on as well since you use your ultimate, so you're sticking close to enemy champions all the time, which is kind of nice. Iceborne Gauntlet is good for champions that want to build a lot of armor and want to scale and build a lot of armor as well. Most of the time, you don't really build this as a tank. Most of the time, you build like Heartsteel instead or other items. But there are some situations where you're against multiple AD champions and you just want to build armor. You become completely unkillable with Iceborne, as well as dealing the extra damage as well, which is quite nice. Warmogs on top of Heartsteel and on top of like Titanic Hydra and Canik Rukn can be a very strong combo, but the problem is it doesn't give you any armor or mag resist. So if you want extra HP, it's great, but outside that, it doesn't really give you too much. Randuin's Omen's very, very strong against crit damage. I mean, extremely powerful. If you're against 2 or more champions that deal crit damage, and if they're fed, just build Randuin's Omen. This item is so strong against crit. But of course, it's not going to be strong every single game. If you're against champions that have 0 crit, this item's going to be useless. So that's why it's sitting in B tier. And Force of Nature is just weaker than Canik Rukn. There are some scenarios which Force of Nature can do very well because you can get the extra movement speed, which can allow you to gap close and get closer to enemy champions. But in general, it's much weaker than Canik Rukn. Winter's Approach is absolutely dog shit. Honestly, I should really put this item in D tier. It is fucking terrible. It's by far the worst tier item in the game. You never want to build this item. Spirit Visage, again, very situational, but most of the time you'd rather go Canik Rukn and Force of Nature. The extra healing and shielding effects that you get on Spirit Visage is just not worth it. You'd much rather get Force of Nature and get more movement speed, or Canik Rukn to get the magic shield at the start of every fight. And Dead Man's Plate, by far the worst armor item in the game. Yeah, again, you don't get that much value. The movement speed is not as much as like Force of Nature, for example, and yeah, it's a pretty meh item overall. Onto boots. Of course, still the strongest boots in the game are still the defensive boots, both Mercury Treads and Plated Steel Caps. These defensive boots are still very, very powerful. You play bruisers, you play tanks, you can even play AD carries, mages, junglers, you can play supports. Any champion in the game can build these defensive boots if you're against 3 or more champions that deal the same amount of damage. Mercury Tread is ability power, Plated Steel Caps is attack damage. 3 or more champions, you just build these boots and you are basically going to take 20% more damage, maybe even more than that, and still survive as well. In the A tier, of course, Boots Lucidity moves up to the A tier. These runes getting mana regeneration is a big bonus for Enchanter support players out there. These give you so much value and are really powerful at the moment in the current meta. Definitely abuse these boots. They're very strong. But of course, Boots of Mana is still going to be used on mages in the mid lane, since it gives you the plus magic penetration, which, as I mentioned, is much better in the early game, but doesn't scale as much into the late game. Another thing you can do as well, which they kind of fixed in the previous patch, is you can now actually change boots. So for example, mages, you can go Boots of Mana in the early game because it gives you the mana regeneration. It also gives you the +8 magic penetration. But if you build items like Ludens and Crown of Shattered Queen, you might have enough mana. So you might think, I'm against an Yone jungle, a Caitlyn AD carry, and a Camille top. I need some armor boots. I'm going to replace Boots of Mana for armor boots. Much better to do that. Much better. Berserker's Grease is also still pretty decent, especially on hit champions, but Gluttonous Grease is normally used as the better option. I would say Gluttonous Grease is probably better, but Berserker's Grease is still very good if you're playing champions that want a lot of attack speed. And Boots of Outburst is just not really too great. The +10 armor penetration, just not worth it. You'd much rather get the extra attack damage and also the extra Omnivamp from the Gluttonous Grease. This will just help you with sustain in general during team fights. And lastly, we have the Boots enchantments. Stasis is still one of the strongest Boots enchantments in the game. If you have the gold, if you're ahead during the game, and if you know that you're going to get focus, you build Stasis and then you'll be completely fine. You'll be able to survive quite a lot of damage. So Stasis is still very powerful. However, there are other boots upgrades which are also very powerful. Golgol Stoneplate. This boots upgrade for only 500 gold is an absolute steal right now. If you're playing bruisers, if you're playing tanks, if you're surrounded by 3 or more enemies, you are going to get a humongous shield, like a massive shield, which is going to help you a lot with survivability. So Golgol Stoneplate, absolutely great. Another thing which I have kept on mentioning throughout this video is how much crowd control there is in the game right now. AD carries, bruisers, assassins can build Quicksilver to stop crowd control coming your way, and enchanters can build the Veil Enchant. Veil Enchant is the best right now for enchanter supports. Of course, you don't want to build it every game, but if there are certain scenarios where there is a lot of crowd control, Veil is a very, very broken boots enchant. Dreammaker is still decent. It still gives you more healing and shielding power, and it gives your AD carries or whoever you're healing and shielding more damage. It can be a great boots upgrade if you're not going for the Veil enchant. However, you can also go for Locket. A crazy interaction that people don't know about is the healing and shielding effect from the support items also enhances the shield from Locket. So you get more shield value from Locket because the healing and shielding percentage. So very strong combo right now. And that's why Locket is sitting A tier. Magnetron, really good for champions and not enchanters, tank support, sorry, that want to play for engagers, that want to go for outplay potentials. There are many times that people don't know that Magnetron can also go onto your minions, but also enemy minions as well at the same time. Basically any minions as well as jungle monsters as well. People might not know about this, but Magnetron can actually go on jungle monsters as well. So it's very, very powerful if you want to play tank engage supports, or just engage tanks in general that want to stay close and use their crowd control. It's great for outplay potential, and it gives you extra movement speed as well. Potobelt is also very good and maybe a bit more reliable than Magnetron in terms of being able to disengage as well as engage with engage supports and other champions as well. Just that bit of mobility can help out AD carries as well at the same time. Ravenous Hydra, most of the time only really gets built with champions that you're going to be building a lot of attack damage on, but in general, Ravenous Hydra just doesn't really give you as much damage as you want, and you'd much rather go for more defensive enchantments or enchantments that gives you more mobility rather than more damage. Glorious is only really used on a few champions like Olaf and Singed. Outside of that, the movement speed is not really worth it. You'd much rather get a dash instead. Hextech GLP, I've not really used this enchantment too much. I've seen it a few times. The range is nice, the slow is nice, but again, I would much rather get other boots enchants instead of Hextech GLP at the moment. That's just my opinion. I'd much rather get movement or an extra shield or QSS or Veil to make sure that I can block any crowd control that comes my way. And by far three of the worst boots upgrades right now, which to be fair, all three of them really need to get removed. Repulsor really only gets used if you're playing against Katarina or Samira, but most of the time you should have at least one champion or two champions in your team that can stop the ultimate anyway, which they should actually keep their ultimates for the Samira and also the Katarina, which means that you're pretty much going to be useless with Repulsor. That's why this enchantment is in C tier. Teleport is so fucking useless in Wild Rift. The only time where teleport actually gets bought is if like my jungler runs it down. There's 30 seconds left until Elder spawns, and there's 30 seconds left until the jungler spawns. The jungler swaps out to teleport, and they can get to the objective much quicker when they spawn. That is pretty much the only time when you want to build teleport enchant. Top laners don't build this. You don't build this when you're split pushing, because you can easily just get from one map to the other by using the bandle portals. Like, why would you get this enchant when bandle portals exist? Bit weird. And also Meteor, again, damage not really too high. You deal more damage probably than Ravenous, but Ravenous is much easier to hit. Meteor is just, not really good rune. The only time that you would build Meteor was if you was playing with Camille. But even Camille now, you'd rather get Gargoyle instead, which gives you more shield and stasis to keep you alive, or Quicksilver to stop any crowd control. So that's basically it. And there you go. That is all the items and in-depth and talking about all the items in general in Wild Rift patch 6.1. Again, if you have any comments, if you have any questions about any of these items, or maybe you have any thoughts about any of these items they maybe think deserve to be higher or lower, or some cool interactions, I would love to hear about maybe some item interactions with some champions that maybe you figured out that I haven't figured out yet. That'd be great. Yeah, hopefully enjoy this video. Hopefully you enjoyed a little bit of a rundown. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.